3 days before my wedding, my fiancé called me crying. Not angry, not confused, terrified. And the first thing she said made my blood run cold. "Why didn't you tell me about your daughter?" For a moment, I thought she was joking. I laughed. She didn't. That's when I realized something was terribly wrong. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 32 years old. And until that phone call, I thought I knew exactly who my enemies were. I was wrong. Because the people who nearly destroyed my wedding weren't strangers. They were my parents. If you enjoy emotional stories about betrayal, family secrets, and shocking twists, stay with me until the end. Because this story changed my life forever. Growing up, my parents cared about one thing: appearances. Everything had to look perfect. Perfect house, perfect reputation, perfect family. The problem was that I wasn't the son they wanted. I didn't become a lawyer like my father. I didn't join the family business. I built my own company. And that decision created a distance between us that never truly disappeared. My mother always smiled in public. But behind closed doors, she constantly reminded me that I had disappointed them. When my company started succeeding, things became even stranger. Instead of celebrating, they became colder, more critical, more distant. At first, I didn't understand why. Later, I realized the truth. My success meant I no longer needed their approval, and they hated that. Then I met Sophie, the woman who changed everything. She was kind, honest, funny, the type of person who made every room feel brighter. For 2 years, our relationship was nearly perfect. Then I proposed, and she said yes. I thought my life was finally falling into place. I had no idea everything was about to collapse. 3 days before the wedding, Sophie called me, crying, shaking, barely able to speak. I rushed to her apartment. The moment I arrived, she handed me a folder. Inside were photographs, documents, printed emails, and one shocking claim. According to the papers, I had fathered a child years earlier and abandoned her. I stared at the pages, completely stunned. None of it was true, not one word. Then Sophie revealed something even worse. The information had come from my parents, my own parents. They had met with her privately. They told her they couldn't allow her to marry me without knowing the truth. I felt physically sick. Why would they do this? What were they trying to accomplish? At that moment, I didn't know, but I was determined to find out. That night, I drove straight to my parents' house. The confrontation exploded almost immediately. My father denied nothing. My mother looked strangely calm. Then my father said something I'll never forget. "We did what we had to do." I stared at him. What does that even mean? His answer shocked me. "She's not right for this family." Suddenly, everything became clear. This wasn't about a child. This wasn't about truth. This was about control. They wanted my wedding canceled, and they were willing to destroy my life to make it happen. The next day, things got worse. Rumors started spreading. Friends began asking questions. Relatives started calling. Some people believed the story immediately. Others didn't know what to believe. Meanwhile, Sophie remained caught in the middle. Part of her trusted me. Part of her was afraid. And honestly, I couldn't blame her. If someone showed me a folder filled with documents and photographs, I might have doubted too. But something about the evidence felt wrong. Too perfect. Too organized. Almost as if someone had created it specifically to convince her. That's when I decided to investigate. And what I discovered would eventually destroy every lie my parents had built. 2 nights later, while reviewing old records connected to the documents, I noticed a name. A young woman, 23 years old, the same name attached to the supposed child. At first it meant nothing. Then I found an address, and suddenly everything changed. Because the person connected to the story was real, very real. And according to public records, she lived less than 20 miles away. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, questions racing through my mind. Who was she? Why was her name connected to this lie? And why did it feel like she held the key to everything? I decided there was only one way to find out. I was going to meet her, even if it changed my life forever. The next morning, I drove across town to meet the young woman whose name appeared throughout the documents. Her name was Lily, 23 years old, a college student, and according to the story my parents had created, she was supposedly the mother of my abandoned child. The moment she opened her apartment door, I knew something was wrong. Not with her, with the entire story. She looked confused the second she saw me. "Can I help you?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "My name is Ethan Carter." Her eyes widened immediately. Then something strange happened. She looked nervous, very nervous, as if she already knew exactly who I was, and that scared me. A few minutes later, we sat inside a small coffee shop. I placed the documents on the table. Her face immediately turned pale. She recognized them. Every single page, every photograph, every fake story. For several seconds, she couldn't even speak. Then tears filled her eyes. "I never wanted this." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" She looked down, ashamed, guilty, broken. Then she told me everything, and the truth was worse than I imagined. 6 months earlier, my mother had contacted her. At first, it seemed innocent. My mother claimed she was helping collect stories for a charity project. They met several times, built trust, developed a friendship. Then eventually my mother asked for personal photographs, family information, background details. Nothing seemed suspicious until much later, because my mother wasn't collecting information. She was collecting ammunition. The photographs used in the fake story came directly from Lily's social media. The personal information came from conversations. The entire scandal had been manufactured using real details from a completely innocent person. Lily had no child. She had never met me. And she had no idea her identity was being used, until everything exploded. I sat there stunned. Even after everything my parents had done, this felt unbelievable. Why would they do this? Lily hesitated. Then she answered, "Because they were desperate." That answer confused me. Desperate for what? Then she revealed something even more shocking. My parents had been investigating Sophie for months, trying to find reasons to stop the wedding, trying to create conflicts, trying to push us apart. When nothing worked, they created a lie, a massive lie, and they used Lily to do it. For the next hour, Lily provided messages, emails, records, evidence. Enough evidence to destroy the entire story. For the first time since this nightmare started, I finally felt hope. Real hope. Because now we had proof. Actual proof. Not opinions, not arguments. Proof. But there was still one problem. Sophie. When I arrived at her apartment that evening, she looked exhausted. The last few days had been brutal. For both of us. I handed her the evidence. Every message, every document, every timeline. She read silently, page after page, slowly, carefully. Then tears appeared in her eyes. "I should have trusted you." I shook my head. No. Because honestly, I understood her fear. The lie had been convincing. The evidence had looked real. Anyone could have believed it. What mattered now was the truth. And finally, the truth was winning. For the first time in days, Sophie smiled. A real smile. The kind I thought I might never see again. Then she asked a question. What happens now? I looked at the stack of documents. Then I thought about my parents. Their lies. Their manipulation. Their willingness to destroy everything. And suddenly I knew exactly what had to happen. We stopped hiding. The next day, my parents began calling. Again, and again, and again. Neither of us answered. Apparently they had heard rumors. Apparently they knew something was changing. Because when people build lies, they become terrified of the truth. Meanwhile, wedding preparations continued. But now there was a strange tension underneath everything. almost like the calm before a storm, because everyone knew something big was coming. They just didn't know what. 3 days later, rehearsal dinner arrived. The event was held inside an elegant hotel ballroom. Nearly 80 guests attended. Friends, relatives, business associates, people from every chapter of our lives. My parents arrived early, smiling, acting normal, pretending nothing had happened. Watching them laugh and socialize made my stomach turn, because they genuinely believed they had escaped consequences. They believed the story was over. They believed they had won. They couldn't have been more wrong. As dinner continued, speeches began. Family members stood up, shared memories, told stories, made jokes. Everything appeared normal. Then my father stood. The room became quiet. He lifted his glass, prepared to speak, prepared to enjoy another moment of attention. But before he could say a single word, the ballroom doors opened. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. Every eye focused on the entrance. And standing there was Lily, the young woman whose life had been dragged into this nightmare. She wasn't alone. Behind her were 2 attorneys and a folder filled with evidence. My father's face immediately lost all color. My mother's smile disappeared. For the first time all evening, they looked afraid, very afraid, because the truth had finally arrived. And within the next few minutes, everything they built would begin collapsing. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire ballroom seemed frozen. Every guest was staring at the entrance. And standing there was Lily, the woman my parents had used as the centerpiece of their lie, the woman who was supposed to remain silent forever. But she wasn't silent, not anymore. My father lowered his glass. His hands were shaking. My mother looked completely stunned. The confidence they had carried all evening vanished instantly, because deep down, they knew exactly why Lily was there, and they knew what was coming. Lily slowly walked into the ballroom. The attorneys followed behind her. Guests exchanged confused looks. Whispers spread across the room. People could sense that something important was about to happen, something nobody expected. I stood beside Sophie and watched. For the first time in days, I felt calm. Not because I wanted revenge, because the truth was finally about to speak for itself. And the truth doesn't need help. It only needs a chance. Lily stopped near the center of the room. Then she looked directly at my parents. The silence became unbearable. Finally, she spoke. My name is Lily Morgan. Her voice was steady, confident, strong. Not the voice of someone hiding. The voice of someone who was tired of being used. I am the woman whose photographs and personal information were used to create a false story about Ethan Carter. The room exploded with whispers. People looked toward my parents, then back toward Lily, then toward me. Nobody knew what to think. Lily continued, I have never been in a relationship with Ethan. The room became quieter. I have never had a child with Ethan. Even quieter. I didn't even know Ethan existed until a few days ago. Now nobody was speaking at all. Every eye shifted toward my parents. My father's face had turned pale. My mother stared at the floor. Neither of them could look at anyone. Then Lily opened her folder. She removed printed messages, emails, photographs, documents, one by one. Evidence. Real evidence. Not rumors, not accusations. Facts. She explained everything. How my mother contacted her months earlier. How trust had been built. How personal information had been collected. How innocent photographs had been used. How an entire story had been manufactured. And most importantly, how none of it was true. As she spoke, guests became visibly shocked. Some looked angry, others looked disappointed. A few simply looked heartbroken, because many of them had known my parents for years, and now they were discovering a side of them nobody expected. Finally, one of my father's closest friends stood up. He looked directly at him. Tell me she's wrong. The room fell silent. Everyone waited. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. No answer. Because there was no answer. The evidence was overwhelming. For the first time in my life, I watched my father lose complete control of a room. The man who always had an explanation, always had an excuse, always had an answer, had nothing. Absolutely nothing. Then my mother suddenly began crying. Real tears. Not dramatic tears. Not attention-seeking tears. The tears of someone whose choices had finally caught up with them. "We were trying to protect you." Her voice trembled. The words sounded weak. Even she didn't believe them. I looked at her quietly. "Protect me from what?" She couldn't answer. Because there was no answer. The truth was simple. This had never been about protection. It had always been about control. For years, they wanted to control my choices, my career, my relationships, my future. And when they realized they couldn't, they tried to destroy it instead. My mother buried her face in her hands. My father looked exhausted. Suddenly, they didn't seem powerful anymore. They seemed small, very small. Because lies can make people look powerful temporarily, but truth always wins eventually. Then Sophie stood beside me. She squeezed my hand. And in that moment, I realized something. My parents hadn't lost because they were exposed. They lost because they failed to break us apart. That was their real goal. And they failed. Completely. A few minutes later, my father slowly stood up. The room became silent again. Everyone expected another excuse, another lie, another attempt to escape responsibility. Instead, he surprised everyone, including me. I was wrong. The words sounded painful, like they were being dragged out of him. I was completely wrong. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. He looked toward Sophie, then toward me, then toward every guest in the room. And for the first time in years, he seemed honest. I let my pride become more important than my son. My mother began crying harder. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. He paused. But I wasn't. The room remained completely silent. Because sometimes the most powerful moments aren't loud. They're quiet. After several seconds, my father sat down. The fight was over. The lies were over. The manipulation was over. Everything was finally over. That night, the rehearsal dinner continued. Not perfectly, not normally, but honestly. And honesty felt better than perfection ever could. The next day, Sophie and I got married. It wasn't the wedding I originally imagined. It was better, because now there were no secrets, no lies, no hidden agendas, only truth. Years later, people still ask me what happened. They ask if I hate my parents. They ask if I regret exposing them. My answer is always the same. No, because exposing the truth isn't revenge. It's accountability. There is a difference. The biggest lesson I learned wasn't about betrayal. It wasn't about family. And it wasn't about forgiveness. It was about something much simpler. Never allow someone else's version of your story to become the truth. Not even when those people are family. Not even when they're the people who raised you. Because your life belongs to you. Your future belongs to you. And eventually, the truth belongs to everyone. If you enjoyed this emotional story about betrayal, family secrets, and justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful storytelling content. And remember, a lie can travel far, but the truth always arrives eventually. The end.